So welcome to the first Saturday session of TEPE conference, and actually the last paper session as well, because after this is the panel and the closing of the conference. So my name is Erika Lofstrom. I'm from the University of Helsinki, and I'll be chairing this session. I'm also a long-term member of the TEPE board, and we organized the TEPE conference last year. So the common theme in this session, if I understand the papers correctly, is about practice teaching in teacher education. So looks like we will have a set of very interesting papers. And all the presenters are present, and we have also Igor here, who is taking care of everything. All right, so the first presenter is Nataša Zrim Martinjak, and her paper is Challenges of Practical Pedagogical Training During Distance Education and Learning. And Nataša, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. Good morning.
We have half an hour for each presentation. So I believe the presenters have prepared for 15 to 20 minutes. So let's keep to the schedule, and then we will have time for a few questions. And hopefully we can pull a little bit together at the end of the session. So please, Nataša, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I will share my presentation. It doesn't have much text that you won't need to read and listen me at the same time. Its purpose is to follow easier and for me to be more colorful. As you can see on my first slide of presentation, I came from Faculty of Education, University of Ljubljana for Department of Social Pedagogy. I'm going to talk about the challenges of practical pedagogical training during the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic from March to June 2020, when education and learning suddenly shift from schools to home living rooms, kitchens, bedrooms, children's rooms. The COVID pandemic hit the world at a time of practical pedagogical training in education and related institutions. Some students just started their practical pedagogical training, and we have discontinued this due to the declared pandemic. For them and for everyone else who had not yet started practical pedagogical training, we had to figure out how to do practical pedagogical training at a distance. I will present a model of a solution for the implementation of practical pedagogical distance training for students of social pedagogy, which was included in the strategy of the response of the Faculty of Education to the emergency situation of the COVID-19 pandemic. First, I will highlight the importance of practical pedagogical training for students of social pedagogy. Next, I will present my experience with the challenge of figuring out how to provide practical pedagogical training during a distance learning program, which seemed almost unattainable. I will also present a model for a solution, and I will present the results of the research, how students describe the experience and what they learned, and what we can learn as teacher educators. For me, that is most important. It is probably not necessary to present how important practical learning is for students, how important it complements theoretical knowledge, and how important learning experiences in authentic learning environment are already during the education. In the social pedagogy study program, practice is included in the second, third, and fourth year, twice 10 days or 2 weeks, and once 20 days or a month. In the second year, the practice is in school or kindergarten. In the third year, the practice is in an educational residential homes for teenagers. And in the fourth year, the students can choose where they want to go. This was also the plan for 2019-20 academic year, but due to the COVID-19 pandemic, it was not possible to run it. Some students have just started practical training and we have to stop it. The challenge of figuring out how to provide practical training for students during the first wave of the COVID-19 time, and even how to think about it depending on the situation, was huge for us teachers, educators. We had just more time in the semester, and at the beginning, we hoped we could just put it off for a while, that the distance education and studying would only last a while, and that the epidemiological situation would calm down in a few weeks and that everything would be the same as before. But soon we realized that it wasn't going to be that way. We had less and less time in the semester, and it was hinted that the educational and related institutions would not reopen until the end of the semester. And we had to find a solution to uncertainty by exploring all the possibilities we could think of. When I first verbalized this idea, practice at a distance, I thought that these words don't go together, that this phrase doesn't work. I immediately involve students in thinking about where they see opportunities for practical learning and work, what we can offer to the community. I had many conversations with them, simultaneously looking for ideas, brainstorming, but also their responses were great reluctance, unwillingness, aversion to ideas, and even thinking about adaptations and any kind of implementation according to the situation. So the faculty came up with the idea of support, of addressing needs in crisis situation. We all embrace this umbrella idea and recognize in it the possibilities for a supportive response by our faculty. At the same time, we were able to allow it to be adapted practical learning in the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. Before beginning, students expressed many concerns, doubts, uncertainties, and fears. As the Faculty of Education, which trains the future pedagogical professionals, we have chosen a supportive response to the needs of children, parents, teachers, schools, and we have specified it according to the course of study. In addition to the supportive stance, we recognize the opportunity to simultaneously learn how students respond in crisis situation. For social pedagogy students, we came up with the idea of social pedagogical support that can help alleviate the plight of society and individuals in the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. We planned a supportive assistance and respond to the needs of those who would need it. In a collaboration with schools, residential homes, and non-governmental organizations. We pointed out to students that they could help others at distance. Specifically, this means that they can prepare activities, help with learning, or anything else that others would need and students are able to provide. Students found on their own who they would help, or this was mostly faculty referred students to those who need help. For all students involved, we arranged mentoring support through the whole process from department members. The main question of my research is how students describe this experience of distance support and assistance, adapted practice in the crisis situation of the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic, and how they evaluate their personal and professional achievements in the final reports. The problem is particularly interesting because it is a specific field of study that trains future experts with the goal of supportive response to the current needs of individuals, groups, or society. A qualitative research approach and a descriptive method of empirical pedagogical research were used. Data were analyzed using the content analysis method. The analysis included the final reports of social pedagogical students who completed the distance support during the first months of the COVID-19 pandemic in the 2019-20 academic year. The sample included 123 final reports. The reports were of the open type. In directions, students were directed only in the included areas. For the needs of this research, the parts of the report that were analyzed were those related to reflection of the experience of practical learning in distance and reflection on personal and professional achievements. The main purpose of my interest in final reports was to find out students' perspective on the situation they have been involved, and further in-depth consideration what we as teacher educators can learn from their voices. I will set out the main findings from this research. First, I will present the results through the time continuum and the 6 content categories through which students identified the experience of supportive help at a distance in crisis situation. And further, I will also present the 6 content categories through which students evaluate their personal and professional achievements. The analysis shows that students describe the experience through the time continuum from the initial experience with initial information and conversation about the idea, then through the process of support, and at the end, through the final reflection on the experience and evaluated achievements. At the beginning, students felt uncomfortable emotions such as fear, sadness, disappointment, anger, reluctance. During the process, these uncomfortable emotions usually turn into satisfaction. Before they started the support process, as they report, they were doubtful, they were skeptical in the quality and feasibility of distance support. They were uncertain, they faced a big challenge. They had resistance to learning help, learning support. They were confused and worried. Some understood the idea as an additional burden. They doubted their own abilities. However, they emphasized that at least they were getting numerous acquisition and an opportunity to step out from their comfort zone. But some of them did not get beyond the initial perspective. They did not go beyond a negative outlook, and they felt uncomfortable feelings even after the process and the reflection were over. They persisted with the idea of the planned practical training. They wrote that they felt exploited. in the support process when they helped others. They felt deprived. They thought that they had learned nothing, that the supportive help was useless for them. And they compared a lot to planned experiences, even if they didn't get planned experiences, but they thought the planned experiences would be better. On the other hand, the majority reports positive experience. They know that they change the perspective on the experience and on the situation. By looking into the reality of the crisis situation, they find out how bad the situation of the society is. They also report a change in their perception of learning assistance. They have found out how important learning assistant is. For example, as positive experience, they state rich experience with finding solutions, challenges, new opportunities, very varied. As a response, training to actual needs, as a unique experience, even better than planned practical learning. In between the content, there is something else that is very important to our profession, that is life-oriented social pedagogy, the concept of working in the living space of the individuals. Students state that this experience gives them the opportunity to come home. According to the topics students wrote about, to highlight their achievement, it was also classified 6 content categories. They report important findings about themselves, such as strengthening qualities, for example, flexibility, tolerance, patience. They also report new knowledge and skills. In the first place, computer technological skills, followed by communication skills. They also found out that distance work is possible. A few students report that distance work does not suit them. About the importance of learning assistance, they report that is also social pedagogical work. They also tell about the practical understanding of the theoretical basics in the profession. For example, how important are relationships, planning, listening, responding to needs. Between other achievements, they report quick response, creativity, better time management, working in unpredictable conditions. They also report that in this response, they recognize the contribution to the profession and experience of translating theory to practice. So, what can be conclusion? The main findings show that the decision of adapted practical learning in the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic with supportive help contributed to our professions, and students also achieved a lot. We confirm our theoretical concepts we are teaching in our profession. We should analyze these findings in more detail, and we should think about what exposed content is important for professional identity and response, and how we can include it in the educational program for the future profiles of pedagogues. The main findings also show that during this period, due to the exceptional situation that occurred, the students reached their own limits, which affected both their practical performance and the evaluation of their own performance in the adapted practical training at a distance. This is an important statement about learning to respond to an emergency situation, and it opens up consideration about the compatibility of working to support others when burdened with one's own situation, which is an eternal question in the assisting profession, but perhaps even more exposed in crisis situation. These findings confirm the appropriateness of considering individual differences between students in emergency situations, both in planning practical learning through support activities and in direct implementation. They also encourage consideration of both the emotional, social, and academic needs of the students that emerge in a crisis situation. We should be aware of the different needs regardless of our role. Student dissatisfaction and unkindness with the solution that prevented the implementation of the planned practical learning point to an important aspect of compensating for what was missed with a comparable experience. Therefore, it would also be necessary to consider how to compensate for the lack of practice from the program in order to contribute to the acquisition of the planned competencies through practical learning in an authentic environment. Due to the specifics of the field of study that trains future professionals with the professional goal of supporting response to current needs of users, questions are raised based on the results as to what content still need to be included in teacher education to contribute to the learning of professional response to emergencies. I take the liberty of concluding with a quote from a student. An emergency situation should not relieve us of our responsibility to respond to needs, but should further encourage us to seek solutions and shape change, and unfavorable circumstances should not deter us from our mission to help people in need. Thank you for your attention. If you have any comment, please do not hesitate to say.
Thank you, Nataša. Yes, we have some time for questions or comments, reactions on Nataša's paper. If you want to ask for the floor, I suggest that we use the raise hand function. It's probably the easiest for me to follow that. Yes, please, Nita.
Hi, I'm Nita Haratia. I'm from the Faculty of Education in University of Pristina. I work as a coordinator for student teaching practice, pedagogical practice. So I have a question. How was the result in the ending? So after their students' evaluation, do they have huge differences between students who went to class and them who used this distance pedagogical practice?
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you, Nita.
And then another question, it came right now. Maybe it passed, I didn't have the chance to hear. How was this distance pedagogical practice organized? They took online teaching with the mentor, or you gave them instructions and duties and asked them responsibilities or something like that?
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you.
The first question, they didn't went to class. They all worked at distance. Only those students who have their practice learning before the pandemic, they have experience as it was planned. But all others, they worked at distance. So, and I didn't compare those two groups. I was interested only in these groups who worked at distance. So I don't have the compare results.
According to your perception, how do you see them? You see that they are more enthusiastic, motivated, or less less interested in this kind of organized pedagogical practice? I don't know how to say.
Yeah, at the beginning, they were very frustrated, almost all. A few of them was motivated, enthusiastic, and have a good feeling that we can do a good job. But after the process, after this experience, almost everybody, only the majority feels that this experience was good. Some told that almost better than the real experience, that they are in privileged situation because this won't be again. This was the unique situation, and that they can get the experience in class. In future they will, but this experience nobody else won't get. That was, but some of them didn't feel okay even after the process. They thought they didn't get nothing, that this wasn't good experience, and they would like to have a planned experience in classes. But the majority take a good message from this, that we with this support and they with their help do a good job, that is social pedagogy. And that was our purpose. Are we a social pedagogues? Are we not? And I was satisfied with those statements of students who said, are we just talking something, or we are really, or we can really behave in this way? But I would like to answer also on your second question. They didn't have mentors. Mentors in the schools, in the field, was rare. We were mentors at faculties, and that's why we organized that through the whole process. They get our support because we did, as a faculty, didn't want to give another job in that crisis situation to teachers, because also for the teachers, for all pedagogues, it was a new situation. They have a lot of work with themselves and with kids and parents and so on. And we didn't want that they have also jobs with us. So that's why the solution was that we will do this job.
Yeah. Good point.
Thank you, Nataša, and thank you, Nita, for very good questions. I can see that Igor has raised his hand, so let's take Igor's questions before we move on to the next presentation.
Nataša, I'm just curious, does this brings any long-term implications, or in other words, when we go back to normal, hopefully soon, will you also return with practice back to normal, or you will make some adjustments based on what you learned in this last year?
If yeah, we will go through the with the flow. So we don't know what will happen. If I think the most important is for my profile, for social pedagogues, to respond in crisis situations such as people need. If the schools and other institutions will be open, yes, we will be there. But now we have new experience that also is possible to do on the other ways. And I think this is very important because those young people as students are, they have the whole career in front. Probably they will have opportunities like we can today, we can't imagine even. And they will need to respond professional, because people will be somewhere and people will need them. We can't say, as a student said in my last quote, we can't avoid our response to help people.
That was actually a very powerful quotation that you had there at the end of your presentation. Where is the focus? Very good. Thank you. Thank you so much, Nataša and Nita and Igor, for your very good questions. And let's move on to the next presentation, which is about challenges of linking theory and practice in distance teaching. And I give the floor to Erika Sturk.
Thank you. I will start by sharing my screen. And I got help from you before, so maybe we will see whether you will see the presentation or not.
Yes, it looks very right.
Okay, very good. Okay, thank you. My name is Erika Sturk and I'm a PhD student and also teacher educator at Ljubljana University. And it is a challenge to make a tree grow in the way that Nataša just presented, to link theory and practice. And how this can be done in pandemic and distance teaching times can be looked upon as even more challenging, as you just said, or as an opportunity to build structured models for linking theory and practice in new settings, as we just have seen. In focus in this presentation, the aim is to integrate theory and practice as part of a theoretical course. To guide the student teachers to an understanding of the relation between theoretical knowledge and practice knowledge is of importance, and the student teachers need tools and analytical strategies to make this connection. So student teachers need guidance to transform theoretical knowledge into school practice. And in this guidance, systematic reflections can be used through, for example, joint guided reflections for deep understanding. And here is our first challenge. Professional development could be substantially improved if we could develop ways to learn and teach about practice in practice. But what we mean by in practice is not obvious. And in time of pandemic, practice and place must be discussed in relation to digital space. Ball and Cohen suggest 3 components for professional development as a professional activity centered to the development of practice and practitioners. Theory and practice can be closely connected by learning in practice, by practice-based development, designed, discussed, and reflected upon, and development of what we mean by practice. They describe artifacts as new ways to understand and use practice. We know from experience as teachers that school practice is busy and there is little time for reflection and analysis. So how could professional education be centered in practice and still be thoughtful? Learning centered in practice doesn't have to mean a physical school in real time. Better opportunities can be found in artifacts, for example, pupils' copies, curriculum material, and observation of teaching. If analysis of practice includes several different approaches to teaching the same topic, then students, teachers have material to explore in a comparative perspective, which could sharpen and deepen their understanding of the theory. Also, an analytical approach deepens the student-teacher's understanding. Jensen and Bilkstad also mean that in this use of artifacts, teacher education can plan for what theories the students' teachers should focus on. And in this presentation, this focus is the teaching of writing. In student-teachers development, it is crucial to develop and debate ideas about what to look at, why, what are the theories of learning, and how, about ways to describe what is observed and the theories of how it best is learned. Also where, and herein lies the challenge in distant teaching. What do we mean by practice, and where can practice be conducted? And when is about the question of consequences and use for the student teachers of the theory. This can gain more self-confidence as contributing members of a teacher profession. All and Kohn mean that a design for professional development must contain these ideas. And in this study, the what is the teaching of writing in school years 4 to 6. Over the past few decades, literacy in people's everyday life has transformed from reading of printed sources into writing in digital media. Deborah Brandt described this as a shift from mass reading into mass writing. And therefore, in this presentation, I will introduce how we used a reflective observation model for the teaching of writing. It was first developed for observation of classroom studies, but due to pandemic time, it was transformed to artifacts of schoolbook analysis. And in order to discuss the linking of theory and practice, the following questions are raised. We wonder, how can a theoretical framework of discourses of writing be used to explore practice in school books analysis? And how do the teacher students understand that linking of theory and practice activity has developed their teacher preparation? In this presentation, discourses is comprehended as an understanding of writing and the learning of writing that affects the teacher's teaching of writing. Even as it identified different aspects of writing and teaching of writing as discourses. And in a holistic view of writing, both cognitive and social practices views are included. Earlier studies, they revealed that text-focused discourses dominate, and there is rare views of context-focused writing. And using Bells and Cohen's design for professional development, our model contains the content of what is the teaching of writing. And why so is to understand theories of learning on depth. Theories about writing enacted reveal beliefs about writing and how to educate writing. And the how. It is centered in practice understood as artifacts of school books analyzed. And where? Well, we could take it on campus, but we moved it to Zoom and, as you said, in the bedrooms or by the kitchen table. And it's about the consequences they use understood in reflection, joint guided observations, and analysis. In the blue, you see a traditional teacher education described as theoretical with course literature, lectures, some seminars and follow-ups. And therefore we have used and developed a Ross model, a model for reflective observation of school writing, and added a lesson including modeling of writing in different discourses and joint guided observations and reflective observations in classrooms. COVID came and observations in classroom were not possible. So that was our challenge in pandemic time. Then we leaned on Ball and Cohen and thought that practice must not be physical, instead be an activity, a terrain of action and analysis of a central activity. And we created scaffolding materials for student teachers to analyze, which applied in the Ross model of writing, as you can see in red. The Ross model was transformed to meet the challenges of distance teaching, and the student teacher used a theoretical framework for school writing to analyze and reflect on writing education in school books. And therefore, the new distance teaching model included what you see on the screen. One challenging limitation was that the student teachers were directed to online school books, since the restrictions also included the library. And therefore, the solution was digital school material. Student teachers from teacher education for teacher schools in school years F to 3 at one university and school years 4 to 6 at 2 universities in Sweden was included in this study. And they answered a questionnaire of 13 questions about teaching material, about connection of theory and practice. These were the steps in the model that you just saw, and reflection on school books of analysis, and also agreement for participation. The answer percent of the questionnaire was 49%, which is quite good on digital questionnaires of this time. The student teacher identified the same pattern of discourses enacted as in earlier studies. These results indicate that the students, despite the adaptations, could appropriate the analytical tool presented in the Ross model. This conclusion opened up for new ways of using the framework and theories in teacher education, also in post-pandemic time. Bill and Cohen's design for preparing student teachers to learn in and for practice include the questions and. In the questionnaire, this was formulated as, from a writing didactic perspective, what will be important to you when choosing school books for the future pupils? In the analysis, 4 themes were identified in answers of these questions. First, the student teachers reflected over the potential of a holistic view on writing. And they said, I will be aware of to try to keep in mind to capture many perspectives of writing. They also reflected on the focus on the pupils. It will be important to choose a good teaching material for a writing didactic perspective, where my pupils can use their creativity, identify themselves as authors, and enjoy the writing education. They also talked about that there is a need a lot of writing, and the pupils are encouraged to write longer texts that aligns to write on rather too many, indicating an expectation of longer text. And in this, we can see that they have understood the theory of writing presented of Ivanich. They also had other reflections, such as, I have understood that the school book must be thoroughly analyzed to get a picture of how well balanced it is. There were also challenges for student teachers, the limitations of only referring to and use online school material. They had no technical problems at all, though access was a problem. We used 2 free materials online, and I had no problems, though 3 school books used, the publisher only shared an extract of some pages or chapters. And you see one student teacher says that given the school book analyzed, I'm surprised by how little writing is focused, though we only got access to 3 chapters and therefore a fair overview was difficult. Contrary, 2 digital school books we could get access to full, but they needed subscriptions and included a 2-week tryout which the students teacher used. These school books open up for other challenges. It was very hard to analyze. because all of the clicks on all different links, I did not feel appropriate to the task of analyzing school materials since we could not answer all questions. In this table, we see to what extent the different parts of the course help the student teachers to understand even its framework from the steps in the ROS model. All methods are useful in an individual perspective with a point of gravity on 3 and above, apart from reading course literature. Most students found it most useful with the hands-on work in practice analyzing school books and also joint reflection during seminars. Point of gravity is clearly from the highest side for the last 2 parts, where the student teachers worked in practice and had joint reflectors on practice. I think I have time to mention the comparison between green and pink are interesting. With racing between 3 and 4, as you can see on the scaffolded lecture, and the falling from 3 to 4 on scaffolding lessons. And this can be explained by that the scaffold lecture was a recorded lecture, which some of the students thoroughly used for understanding by taking notes, printing pictures, and they could back and take pauses and listen many times. Though I know that apart from school books and analysis, the pattern understanding also follows the amount of parts included to understand the framework in the course, and is a limitation for the analysis, of course. This study reveals a model in which theory and practice can be linked in distance teaching for student teachers. This practice is not in physical school in real time. We see school books as an artifact and analysis of school books as practice teachers need to manage, even though time often limits this in school practice. Theory was made concrete in practice. It was good to analyze school books. The analysis made the discourses concrete and how they can be enacted. By this teacher education effort, the student teaches possibilities to transform writing theories and the teaching of writing as holistic in knowledge needed in their professional work as teachers. Understanding through struggling with something hard and through joint reflection is of great importance. And not until the teacher students are struggling, they get motivated to study and understand theory, and thereby theory is transformed into deep knowledge. One teacher student was surprised over how difficult it is to choose school books for my future pupils. And it was fun to do a school book analysis, but it was difficult. Reflective joint analysis discussions took a comparative perspective. I thought it was very useful to discuss in the seminars, learning about the others' school books. The student teachers expressed that the course had relevance for future practice. The "and" question was answered. For example, they saw differences between school books, structures, and the wide range of school material to choose between. Reflective thoughts about choice of school books for future pupils reveals an understanding of the importance of a lot of writing, a holistic view of writing, and the hard work to analyze school books. It was informative and important to do this. I will bring these knowledges in my further education and professional work. And thereby, it is possible for the student teachers to in-depth understand how the theory learned at teacher education, thereby be able to implement this in their own professional practice, resisting to teach as they were taught themselves, resisting conservative lessons, resisting unreflecting, imitating the teacher mentor, resisting colleagues to be and school culture at the future workplace. Instead, the model gave the student teacher a sustainable, thoughtful work with the teaching of writing. I said in the beginning that it's a challenge for student teachers to link theory and practice. In this study, it has proven possible to link theory and practice even in time of pandemic. We see an opportunity to build structured models for linking theory and practice in new settings. Reflective analysis of school books can be used as a tool to integrate theory and practice. In Sweden today, skills in school book analysis is of great importance because of deregulation of quality controls. In relation to new governmental investigation, the school minister claims its inadequate teaching materials are a problem in many schools, and teachers are often left alone in process of reviewing and ordering teaching materials. The control of teaching materials is far from what it should be. This study, using a revised ROS model, equips student teachers with tools for book analysis, not being left totally alone in their process. Not only does the model with systematic reflections of practice give the teacher students tools to analyze and reflect over school books, also the analysis and seminar reflections provide the student teacher a common terminology to talk about the teaching of writing, which is a lack. And finally, theory and practice can be linked also when the understanding of where is not bound into a physical place within practice, rather fluent in time and cyberspace. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Erika. Very interesting presentation. Thank you. We have some time for questions. So again, if you have questions, comments, thoughts, ideas, please do raise your hand. Nita, please.
So it's me again. Since I'm doing my PhD related to the student teaching practice, this topic attracts me. So maybe I don't have a question, but I have just a comment. I think that it was a good topic, and I think that in order to get or to find a good connection between theory and practice, I think that a triangle should work. This triangle is contained by what university offers during their theoretical lectures, one. Two, what those school books, as mentioned before, what school books offered connected to these lectures offered in the university. And the third, what are the student teachers' skills to find these connections between what is offered in the university and what is offered in school books or school-based class by teacher. So this triangle, I think, should work in order to get a good connection of theory and practice.
Yes, I totally agree. And I think that this skill is quite hard to get sometimes.
Yeah.
And therefore we thought that reflections together, joint reflections over what we do, strengthen this skill.
Mm-hmm.
So there are, of course, other ways to do this, but this seemed to work at the universities where we tried out on 5 universities from the beginning, but during pandemic time we limited to 2 universities.
Thank you, Nita, for the question.
Thank you.
I'm also thinking that this model, it gives, because we did some research with teachers in continuing or further in-service training, and one of the results that came across was that the teachers felt that they are quite locked with the books that they use, that the books in a way steer them, which might be a good thing, but it might also have other types of effects. And I'm thinking that this kind of exercise does give teachers and student teachers a way to exert agency over the book. So it gives you tools how you can choose and use the books in ways that you don't get the feeling that it becomes sort of too guiding or pushing too much in a direction. So seems that it can give that kind of agency or ownership in a way to the teacher or student teacher. What do you think about that?
Yes, I totally agree. And I just did a small study with some teachers who have been working for a long time and in service training with this model, and they use teaching material and observation, those who could. And there were really great discussions, and agency is a good word to use because they had a critical view on their own schools, school material, and they could have discussions in depth of what do we really give the pupils, what kind of writing. I'm into writing, so we talked about writing, but I think the model can be used for like anything. But what writing do we give the pupils? Well, we are doing, as many other studies, we focus on skills and we focus on process and genre, but we forget about this writing that is so important today, namely to write for others and have this social political view of writing, and what happens to democracy if we don't prepare our pupils for democracy. And that's another project we are working on. So yes, I completely agree, Erika.
Thank you. And Anita, you want to continue? You have another question or comment, please. You are muted. Oh, was that?
No, I didn't have. It just it was
okay.
stayed like that. So.
The famous old hand. Okay, but Milica, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I was really excited because this theory and practice, it's we are used to hearing about sharing experience, and our presentation next will be that. But I think it is important to have a theoretical framework just to know, to guide us. And if I understood correctly, we're talking about materials and theory in a sense of what student teachers are going to implement in their classes, in their teaching training, right? So it's the content of the teaching that is the kind of theory we are talking about. And my it's not a question, maybe a reflection. Did you open the question of do we change our theory in teaching our students how to teach in online, sort of adaptations to our theory on how to teach in these circumstances? Because some of the things are basic, like you need to have your learning objectives and you do your activities, and some of the things are more or less the same, no matter if you are in a classroom or are you in a virtual classroom. But there are some specifics that we do need to add to our teaching in how to teach. So that's more of a reflection, or maybe if you would comment, did you have some of those reflections on how do we teach our students how to teach in this environment, not just the content? Thank you.
Well, I haven't got any answers to your question, but this question is really interesting. We are analyzing some material also on what the teachers do in distant teachings about writing, and there seem to be more writing since it's a way to handle distance teaching. But how to teach student teachers in this, I'm not able to answer right now. I will bring your questions in mind. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erika and Anita and Milica, for a very good discussion. Let's move on to the last presentation of this session, and we continue with the e-environment and practice. And it's Dragana Bjekić and Milica Stojković. Please.
Yes, thank you, Erika. So, hello everyone. Good morning. I am Milica Stojković. I'm associate professor at University of Kragujevac, Serbia, Faculty of Technical Sciences, and the co-author is my dear colleague Dragana Bjekić, also a professor at the same faculty, and we are both in the field mainly of educational psychology. And our presentation is about student-teacher school practice at our university. So just before I go into full screen mode, just a quick confirmation, you can see the presentation?
Yes, we can see the presentation.
Okay. Going full screen. So that is the topic of our presentation, and the presentation consists of these 5 segments. First, a brief introduction about the topic and overview of some of the newest research on student-teacher school practice during the COVID. Just a quick overview, and the main part of our presentation is actually presenting the case study of how student-teacher practice was organized at our University of Kragujevac in Serbia. And finally, we offered some perspectives on teachers' roles in this context and how that can be useful or not, just offering some framework, theoretical, and offering, of course, some conclusions and educational implication and more open questions than answers. So that's the framework of our presentation. So student-teacher practice in schools is, when I was writing, it says that it's very important part of a pre-service teacher education. Maybe it's better to say not very important, but irreplaceable parts. It's essential part in education of teachers, and it is a joint activity of the university and the school itself, and it's in most educational system, it is organized throughout the whole year. So the shutdown of universities and schools due to the pandemic did open a serious problem how to organize effectively this practice. And of course, what we did first as researchers, our first resource was to see what was researched so far. And just from the small section you have on the screen, I won't go into details, but it's just a small fragment of our reference list. You can see that the topic of e-practice and e-practicum or virtual classroom or whatever the authors call, this is very important topic and very research topic. So all the papers are in 2020, some in the beginning of 2021, and I do believe that will continue in the years to come. It will be an intriguing question how to organize and adapt school practice, and the majority of these findings are in the scope of sharing experiences, how student-teacher online school practice was organized, what are some implications, and what are some perceptions of what is changed in the pandemic context. And also our paper has more or less the same goal, to present to you a case study of student-teacher professional practice experience from the second part from the second half of the school year last year until now, basically. And in order to do that, we analyzed how the school practice was organized in 4 different study programs at our university. And in those 4, there were 2 for subject teachers and 2 for class teachers. I know that in different educational system, we call this maybe differently, but I hope we have the same understanding. Subject teachers what subject teachers are and what class teachers are, both in elementary school, and both we took one from bachelor study program and one master's program. So just before I go into description of how it was organized, just a brief relevant information about our university so that you can have some context, because I do believe that context matters. And University of Kragujevac is in the central part of Serbia. It consists of 12 faculties in 6 cities or towns, so it's very geographically spread out. And Kragujevac is the 4th largest city in Serbia. So within our university of 12 faculties, initial teacher education curricula currently exist in 5 faculties, 2 faculties of education who educate mostly teachers, what we called in a previous slide, class teachers, elementary, first 4 grades of elementary school, and the other 3 faculties educate teachers in specific area for subject teaching. Our faculty, where Dragana and I are working, is one of those 3 faculties. So since the teacher professional identity is constructed through narratives, and we presented our description to storytelling, or at least implying or referring to narrative construction of identity. So that's why we have this tale of 4 study programs in 4 seasons in Corona time in Serbia, emphasizing that that this is actually a summarization of just few relevant experience, and that all conclusions are very much tied to that specific context. And at the same time, and paradoxically also, just as in fairy tales, maybe there are some aspects that transcend that specific context, and maybe you can recognize some of our experiences and conclusions as similar to yours or not, and maybe we can have a discussion later about it. So for the sake of aesthetics, we call this 4 and 4, but actually when we analyzed what happened, the processes of how school practice was adapting to the circumstances, we concluded that there were actually 2 main periods. One would be the full lockdown phase from second half of March to June 2020, sort of a first reaction to pandemic and how the school practice were organized. And the second would be sort of on and off to school and on and off to online learning phase, which was from September 2020 and happening still now. So when it comes to this first phase, what happened to how the school practice was organized at our university? First, I think in the first paper we had a comment like, first we hoped that things will sort of won't go as serious as they went, but then it was obvious that it is not a temporary thing. So the first thing was to identify the types of activities that students could undertake remotely. What can be done in that circumstances from in a context where everything is completely online. Then there was the question of selection, what suitable online tools we have for simulation of teaching activities, and also how to communicate with university educators and mentors in schools, and how to overcome this. And the most frequently used platform in the spring was Zoom platform. And also important activities by the end of that semester was preparation of student teachers, how to prepare for the classes in that virtual online environment. Because as I mentioned before, some of the aspects are the same as in preparing for teaching in the regular classrooms, but some are very context specific to this online environment. And the main part basically was that simulation, preparing for that simulation of student-teacher classes with their peers and teacher educators. So peers became the pupils, or the substitute for the pupils in regular schools. and of course under the supervision and just through exchange with teacher educators. And participants, our student teachers, got into a role of online learners as an observers and of their colleagues. So they were in really complex roles. They observed, and then then discussions were mainly organized, and this simulated classroom or simulated instruction, followed by reflection. And as we've heard in the previous paper, reflection and self-reflection are very important step to just understanding and creating your own practice. So that was the first phase. And then from the September of the last year, which we can call it unstable phase, in the sense that it was periodically back to school and back to online, back to school, back to online, depending on what was the current situation with the virus. And what was specific of this period is basically blended learning model for student teaching school practice, in a sense that part of the practice was organized completely on distance in collaboration with teacher mentors, and part of that was organized physically in schools and classrooms in the period when that was possible. So during that process, students were learning some pedagogical aspects of using IT in learning. It turned out as a necessity to have to adapt our teaching to this context. And in this period, our university offered official Microsoft Teams as a platform, also leaving the flexibility to teachers to use different platforms. But that in that period, I think institutions sort of offered some systematical solution for all the teachers. So in describing our experiences, that is the story of how it went at our university. And now we thought it would be useful maybe to propose certain teachers' role in online environment, since all this new circumstances did emphasize some roles. Maybe some roles were put in the foreground, some in the background, and some roles were maybe more visible or more important, or I'm just inviting you all to see. I won't go into details of all of these roles, but what we kind of, by analyzing and reflecting, came to is the M roles. So teacher as a model in online learning, teacher as a mediator, teacher as a manager, and maybe these two, teacher as a manager, the teacher organize all the organization of online activity context, all the online communication content and procedures. That this role was sort of most visible, and also mediator between the content and the learner in online environment. And other roles, maybe not to say that they are least important, but just it was this was how we tried to analyze and to connect with some sort of theoretical background. Also, in this completely distance education, all three partners in the student-teacher practice, being student teachers, teachers educators, and their mentors, because they are really essential teacher mentors in the schools. All three of them, we could argue that there's some online tutoring going on, and we're just inviting you to look at these descriptions. They're divided into what are the central roles in e-tutoring, online tutoring, and what are the more not so central but also important. And just to look at these descriptions and to think of what is your take on this. Do you perceive this as important or not? is it important for us to talk about teachers as content facilitators, metacognition facilitators, process facilitators, advisors, or technologists, or designers, or co-learners, or researchers, and what is the structure of all this in the context of pandemics? So just open question there. And finally, going towards conclusions and just summarizing, we could say that based on our experience at our university, central activities of student-teacher practice at the beginning of the pandemic was to go, as everything, completely online, and later it was possible, and it became easier once we had the opportunity to have this blended teaching and learning combined. And what we were, I don't know, surprised, but at least that our faculty will allow students that they were familiar with IT tools, at least on the technological level. It's not something that was presented as a big difficulty, but during the school practice, there was a necessity for learning that pedagogical aspect of teaching, not in general, to put it very context specific, in online environment, in a specific platform, because some things are not the same in Teams or in Zoom or in some other platform that you're using. And going wider to some maybe implications that is something that we are all interested in. Some things that we see as maybe the most important is how we can improve capacities of student teachers for online teaching in their pre-service education. So what are the recommendations? What are the guidelines that we can create, sort of official guidelines for that kind of practice on a policy level? And also student-teacher experience in organizing online classrooms do empower their general digital competence. I don't think this is something that should be not mentioned. And so all this does empower their general digital teaching competences. And it is something that is going to be required, and that already is required, even before pandemic, and now even more emphasized. And also some teachers' role really foster in this pandemic context, especially mediator and manager. We think less motivator and model, not to say that they are less important, but maybe not so easy, not so visible, because these managerial and mediator roles are more. And just think of concepts of online tutoring, because online teaching and learning is not just this support by video conferencing, as this variety of tools that can be used in that sense. And finally, we offered some questions or maybe directions for future research, or just questions for a debate to have. Is what is innovative in school teacher practice in distance education, in this triangle: school teacher, mentor, pupils, and student teacher, and especially a very specific and delicate question of recordings of online classes, the real classes and the simulation. And obviously there is a practical element to it. Now, I remember back a couple of years ago when we wanted to film class and then have sort of an analysis of that, it was far more complicated to do that. Now it's easier, but it does create some other issues of just issues, and we can discuss that. Also the question of how to train mentor teachers for mentoring in this online environment, because it's not, as in general teaching, some aspects are the same, but some are very specific to this specific online context. And also, what are the roles of university and teacher educators in all this? Is it changed? How it's changed? And what are some general upsides and downsides of this kind of way of student school practice? So yes, that would be all that we have prepared for this session. I'm very interested to hearing your comments, and thank you. I will just stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you very much, Milica, and I believe Dragana is also
yes,
here.
Dragana
yes.
Is here. Mm-hmm.
So thank you, both of you. And again, we have some time for questions and comments. So, and of course, the applause to presenters. So if you have questions and comments, please do again raise your hand. And we have Erika here, please.
Thank you. It's just a comment. Thank you, Milica. Very, very interesting, of course, and important. And just about your thoughts about recording lessons and using teacher education. I know that in Norway, they have had a very big project on recording, and now they are using it in teacher education. So have a look at, for example, Marte Blikstad Balas, who has an upcoming paper about this. So it's just a suggestion if you want to read more.
Thank you. It's very, I would love to, and maybe you could write in the chat, or just it would be easier for to have it saved, the authors, or
yeah, I will write the name of the author, because I haven't got, it's not published yet.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
While, okay, Melanie, please. You are muted.
Yes, sorry about that. Thank you very much for a very interesting talk, and you've raised all sorts of problems that I recognize. My situation, I'm not actually responsible for the teaching practice, but I'm dealing with methodology of subject teaching. And a thought that I think might be useful in this context is also to look at the ways in which the other subjects at the university are being taught online, because I think the teacher learners take up a lot of the methodology that we are using. So if we are doing innovative things with the online teaching ourselves, I think this is giving an implicit model to the teacher learners that there are other ways that they could be doing things. So I just put that out as a suggestion.
Thank you very much, Melanie, for the suggestion. And I see here also Erika has put a suggestion on a researcher who might be relevant. And I can see in the chat there is also a question about the recordings of the previous sessions. Igor, may I ask you to say something about this?
Yeah, sure. So we recorded all the sessions, and we will definitely publish them, most probably on YouTube. Once that happens, we will inform all registered participants, so you will receive an email with the links to the recorded sessions. So don't worry about that. It will probably take a few days to edit them and put them on the web, but you will be informed once that happens. Okay.
Thank you. Just commenting or returning back to Melanie's comment, I also think that this is a great opportunity to, because we are in a way all together in this new situation as teacher educators together with our student teachers. So it also opens up an opportunity to signal the possibility of exploring different ways of doing things together, and also signaling that as teacher educators, we do have some ideas, and we have some models, we have theoretical background, we have research background, but there are also situations where we kind of need to adapt. And I think this is a good place to also model that adaptation and the need for, or the need to scrutinize our existing models and theories, and acknowledging that they might not be giving the answers directly, but let's explore those together. So yeah, I think definitely very important to be looking how things are done in different subjects, and in also in different institutions and different places. So very good. Do we have other questions or comments? I can see that we are running towards the end of our time together in this session. So if there are no further comments at this point, let me try to briefly recap some ideas from this session. I think it's been very, very interesting, and the papers really nicely complemented each other. So, and also I think that the studies presented here and in the conference in general show that teacher educators have really had to reflect on and scrutinize parts and dimensions of teacher education that we have considered as unquestionably important or cornerstone, like practice. I don't think we could have imagined really teacher education without the practice as we used to know it before. But when not done in school in the way we used to do, the whole notion of learning to become a teacher is somehow turned upside down and questioned. And taking this step really tests student teachers, or as in the case of Nataša's study, social pedagogues, professional sense and identity. And raises the questions that what do we focus on and what do they focus on? Is it the performance? Or, as that last powerful quote in Nataša's presentation, the people in need. So what is the focus? And that sort of is perhaps some kind of litmus test of where our student teachers stand in terms of their identity and professional development. Which takes us to Erika's paper, changing or questioning fundamentally held conceptions of how student teachers learn, forces both the teacher educators and the student teachers to identify where the learning can take place, why so, and how, and so on. Those important questions that Erika pointed out in her presentations. And in linking theory and practice, teacher educators and student teachers both need to do the linking. And I guess this is where also Milica's question came in. So really, we are also looking at the meta level in a way. Effort needs to be put on pinning the practice into theoretical framework and models in our work we do as teacher educators, but also we need to do that constantly ourselves and look at how we link theory and practice. And on a meta level, teacher educators are doing the same thing, linking theory and practice, as our student teachers, or at least we are trying them to find ways to do that, and we are doing the same thing. So that becomes very, very obvious now that we are forced to question our old practices. And questioning old practices takes me to Milica's and Dragana's paper, and the idea of a simulated classroom and the different roles, which again shows that it's not only about the student teacher practicing to become a teacher, but there are really many other important roles to be explored. And these new innovative ways of performing or doing practice, executing the practice part of teacher education, provides these opportunities if we are ready to grab them. So it's not just about becoming a teacher, but also how are you as a teacher colleague? So practicing collegiality, or the pupil perspective. How does it feel to be a pupil? Or pupils' parents or guardians as additional roles to be explored. Because we know from prior research that perspective taking through roles is a really powerful learning tool. So with these examples, I think these examples show that teacher educators are really innovative and flexible, and above all, reflective. And with those words, I'd like to end this session and congratulate all the presenters for very, very nice, useful, interesting pieces of research. And thank you for presenting to us, and thank you for the discussion and everybody who took part in this session.